All right, what's up, Ben?
That ought to work. There we
There
go.
we go. We got this
You can
thing
hear me
working.
okay?
Yeah, awesome.
All right,
How are you?
cool. I'm good. How you doing?
Good, man. Couldn't be better, dude. Couldn't be better. I'm excited to get these next few minutes in with you. And good to meet
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, you too. You
All
too,
right, so
Dr. D.
I see you're walking there on something.
Yeah. I have one of those walking treadmills in my office. Usually the internet's too slow in my office to do any kind of video like this, but it appears to be working. So,
Oh, thumbs up.
yay.
There you go. There you go. Awesome. So, man, I just wanted to thank you for coming through today and talking a little bit to our community. We do have here a nice micro environment of biohackers and just really hardcore blood biohacking. We do a lot of data-driven medicine. Our group, and we look to really prove to people, hey, here's the changes in your blood and this is how your body's changing, your psyche's changing, your mood is changing. And we're really really big on uh, biological therapy, not pharmaceutical therapy, not but cellular therapy, good old biochemical therapy. So today I wanted to get some of your insights and a little bit of the cellular world and just get going with it. All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. So, Ben, I know I've been following you for some time. I know how fond you are of biohacking and so forth. And a big something big that we have nowadays is epigenetic clocks. And epigenetic clocks, sometimes people are like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if that's real. I don't know if that really works. What am I, you're telling me that, I'm actually not 37 years old, I'm 42, or you're telling me that I'm actually 29. So what's your thoughts on that? Because sometimes we get pushback on that, and I know we're both good friends with Ryan Smith, which I think has one of the best labs to do these things. But what's your thought on epigenetic clocks, the legitimacy of it, and the future? Just give me the rundown on your point of view.
Yeah, I don't even get into much when it comes to some of these aging evaluations with the lab work that I do with some of my clients, primarily because, first of all, I place a lot of trust in, from a biomarker standpoint, two variables that I think are more important to track than aging clocks, namely glycemic variability and inflammation. Obviously, these days, fluctuations in blood glucose on a daily basis, and average blood glucose can be very easily tracked via continuous blood glucose monitor. And I encourage everyone, not necessarily every day of the year, but at least slapping on one of these sensors for a couple weeks, every couple of months, can give you a great deal of data about the variations in blood sugar, which is highly correlated to longevity. And then the inflammatory piece, there's really not a good continuous at-home monitor for that. Typically, that would be like a test of inflammatory markers like homocysteine and HSCRP and fibrinogen, et cetera, that you could get on, say, a quarterly basis. But that being said, the state of inflammation that occurs when we're looking at a chronic inflammatory condition tends to be correlated to a slightly lower heart rate variability. And so one could say that by tracking heart rate variability, using a ring or a watch or wearable, and tracking glycemic variability using a continuous blood glucose monitor is going to allow you to keep your finger on the pulse of two biomarkers that I think are more important than these aging clocks. Now, of course, the old school method of using what might be considered an aging clock is telomere evaluation.
Right.
With some of the more accurate telomere evaluations being done by companies like SpectraCell, for example. But you're looking at the telomere length of a collection of white blood cells. It's not necessarily indicative of the overall aging process. It tends to wildly fluctuate from lab to lab, and it might give you a little bit of information about the rate at which your telomeres are shortening or the overall length of your telomeres, at least on the cells that are being assayed. But I really think that that test, it's just not that accurate. I've seen a ton of different results come back from a bunch of different labs that, one will tell you you're 9 years old, one will tell you you're 50 years old biologically. And so, hence the advent of these newer aging clocks, which tend to be based on things such as the rate of methylation on the DNA as a predictive marker of longevity. Now, these seem to be a little bit more accurate than the telomere evaluations, but I don't really see a lot of actionable data from something like that because you could get back what might be an accurate result of, say, your chronological age of 45, you had a biological age of, let's say, 48. And that's kind of interesting in the same way that, say, like a genetic evaluation of the gut biome might be interesting, or, even a genome analysis of your overall genetics might be interesting. But I really don't think it's as valuable as the more hard data that you'll get from, blood testing, biomarker testing, HRV, glycemic variability, stool analysis, urinary hormone analysis, et cetera. And so, I don't really get too carried away with these aging clocks, and I'm not that impressed with the consistency of the data yet. I don't know, Ryan, I've done some of those tests, but I just, it's not something I put a lot of time and energy into, honestly.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, no, and much respect to your thoughts, and that's where I like to tell everybody, data collection is really important, right? Because like once you start collecting more data, right, and then over time, so you collect data, and over time you can start doing trends, right? You can start seeing your own trends, and we live in a data environment, right? People want data, right? You want your financial data, you want data for your company, et cetera. And especially if you have more biological data, the better it is, right? So, and I'm with you right there. HRV, am wearing a Whoop right now. It's funny you mentioned continuous glucose monitor. I never wore one because I practice jujitsu avidly. And I'm like, this thing's gonna fly off. So, but today I actually ordered one. I'm gonna figure out how I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna duct tape it to my arm or something.
Yeah, yeah. The thing is that they now sell, like on Amazon. It's kind of this huge market for diabetics, of course, who wear continuous blood glucose monitors, waterproof and extremely strong adhesive bands, very similar to like kinesio tape that you apply over the actual sensor. I think for athletes, one of the best places for the sensor is the back of the arm, like right about right there, rather than the abdominals, which tends to rub a little bit more, especially with something like rolling. And so what you do is you get a sensor, and then you can just, let's say you get a Dexcom G6 or a Freestyle Libre or whatever. Those are probably the two most common models, the Dexcom and the Freestyle. And then you just go to Amazon and type in like Freestyle Libre adhesive patch, right? And you can get a patch that you put over the sensor. And some people will even go as far as to use like that topical skin glue and actually apply that over it as well. And I used to do like Spartan races wearing these things, and it was bulletproof as far as staying on. So you just got to
Really?
modify it a little bit. And I haven't seen it to be an issue.
Awesome, man. I actually didn't know that. Just learned something, so I appreciate that. But yeah, let me just comment a little bit on what you were saying. Yeah, like big fan of fibrinogen and homocysteine, HSCRP. Looking at inflammation, and also I'm just going to tie in a little bit of everything together. I don't know if you're familiar with this study called the TRIM trial. The thymic stands for thymic regeneration, immunorestoration, and insulin mitigation. And it seems like all the principles of aging, and I mean aging and inflammation, right? There's that new term inflammaging, right? They kind of go together, right? So all sits on the premise of glucose variations, which leading to insulin resistance, and then inflammation, which leads with the immune system, right? So the immune system wearing out and the person getting inflamed, it's like, well, this is not too complicated, buddy. You're starting to get old and you're starting to get some wear and tear, So yeah, right there with you. And then the question is, okay, how to track this data? And I'm going to be honest, Ben, the regenerative medicine space, I mean, it moves so fast. So, where I kind of hide is like, okay, let me get as much data as I can. And this is personally what I like to do. I on my own body, on my family, et cetera. I'm like, let me collect all this data, so I can actually start building trend lines and so forth, and keep track of what's going on, right? And to me, it's super important, man. It's me. It's it's forget money, forget
Yeah.
every. That's why without this, it's like there's nothing else, right? So I'm a data guy. I'm obsessed with collecting data, and that's actually kind of how I started my company, because I wasn't feeling good, and I was like, you know what? I don't know where to turn, so I'm just going to collect as much data as I can. And I started, connect the
Yeah.
dots, hung out with some smart people such as yourself to start. Hey, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, and today we got a comeback child, as I like to say, right? So, but now
Yeah.
let's go on inflammation a little bit. So, your thoughts on immunological testing. So, we're living in an environment now too, because everybody's like, oh, you hear more about gluten toxicity and leaky gut and chemical, right? A lot of, for example, toxic halides, the fluorides, the chlorine, and the bromides displacing iodine, and then things like lead interfering with GABA, cadmium interfering with dopamine, throwing off neurotransmitter studies or neurotransmitter health. So, what are your thoughts on that too? That testing for that kind of stuff, testing for really collecting the data on that. I mean, do you see any validity on that? Because you just mentioned inflammation is kind of a little
Yeah.
hard to study. So, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on?
Yeah. No, I'm pretty basic with inflammatory markers for measurement. Like I mentioned, things like CRP and homocysteine and fibrinogen. I would say the closest that I get to making recommendations for what might be considered immunological testing is I like a company called Cyrex, Cyrex. They do a pretty good job with testing for things like food allergy, the white blood cell reaction to like the raw and the cooked version of the protein. They typically double test everything. They do some mold and mycotoxin analyses, things like that as well. But I really don't do a whole lot with immunological testing. Obviously I'm not a doctor, so I'm really not practicing medicine in that respect, anyways. But no, I don't really get that advanced with the immunological stuff.
Yeah, so just the my last webinar was with Dr. Mark Engelman, the medical director for Cyrix. So we get
Oh,
along
okay.
just fine. Yeah, yeah, they know
Yeah.
us. Uh, I'd say we're probably one of their top clients, if not close to that. So we
Wow.
use him a lot, a lot. Yeah, yeah. So, and Dr. Mark Engelman, oh my God, he's a genius. We call him up a lot. My staff calls him up a lot, when we have questions. And I'm going to tell you, I mean, those tests, especially, on the autoimmune side, et cetera, do so much. They really give guidance, because as the person starts to have, for example, they start reacting to gluten, right? Like me, for one, I can't deal with gluten. I This week I stopped drinking coffee, right? I am making sure so hard that I'm not eating any wheat, any gluten, because I know what it's going to do to me. I'm going to crash, right? And actually, my energy's been really good. I'm married to a Cuban,
Yeah.
Ben. Cubans drink
Yeah,
a lot
that's
of.
interesting because the coffee can have some cross reactivity with gluten. There's several things that can cross react with gluten, but I think also what's interesting with it, tests like Cyrus, I say food allergy panel, a lot of people will get that and they'll flag positive for certain food groups and kind of like get all defeatist and think that that means that they have a some type of immune reaction that they're stuck with for life. It's very similar to like a genetic analysis where someone might find out they're, say, a fast caffeine metabolizer. And yeah, unless you get like a CRISPR gene editing or something like that, yeah, those are your genes, and that is what you're stuck with if you want to think of it that way. But with something like a an immunological test, as you know, Dr. D, you can see significant changes. Let's say with protocols for restoring the proper lining of the gut. Things like
Yeah.
colostrum and bone broth and glutamine and marshmallow root and licorice root. And a lot of these things are very nourishing to the gut. And you can retest after 8 to 12 weeks and find that you have a markedly lower immune reaction. So I think it's important for people to know that you aren't necessarily stuck with the values that you get from a test like that. Even though it is a good test, it doesn't result in a laundry list of false positives. It should be simply be used as a way to empower one to go about healing their gut and then return back and test. And usually a lot of times you'll see things that were flagging high no longer flagging high.
All day, brother, all day. Yeah, no, no. We make sure to, and you're absolutely right on that, because we get these results with our clients. They're like, "Oh my God, I can never eat this." I'm like, "No, no, no, no. If you can never eat this, this is something wrong. We didn't do the proper, therapy, etc. So no, yeah, us, like, we make sure to tell our clients, like, okay, you need to follow a protocol, and we use things like colostrum and so forth, and we'll talk about a little bit about peptides in a little bit, but yeah, like we use some peptides for that stuff, like the BPCs and
Yeah,
KPV, tide,
yeah,
depending on how inflamed they are. If it's a person with like a lot of autoimmune history, family autoimmune history, we'll do a little bit of thymus therapy to really help kickstart that immune system. But basically, Ben, what I'm trying to get at is what we call, at least at Biohacks, physical triggers of immune response. So things that are making your immune system respond, right? And and then it's taking away quality of life. It's basically, what I like to say, you're living a life of scarcity, right? Where you don't have energy, you can't focus, you start to feel your memory go down, etc. Your body's not responding to what you want it to be, right? So I'm a big fan of looking for physical triggers of immune response, seeing what is triggering your immune system and calming it down, right? Because, like, when I went to traditional medical school, there's the concept of immune tolerance, where, hey, you put these things into your body, and your body's eventually, it's going to tolerate it, but it's like, hold on. A lot of this stuff, it's like, it's like an overload to the immune system, and the immune system starts to really, like, kind of go rogue, shoot itself, right? And that's, when you start to polyreact, and the caffeine one is a good one. That's something but I also uh have had issues with, a lot of issues with gluten, so the concept of polyreactivity, that's huge, right? And ultimately, if it doesn't stop, you start attacking yourself, right? You have an autoimmune, right?
yeah.
But that's pretty cool. Then last type of testing I'll ask you about is, what are your thoughts on these predictive cancer tests? There's a lot of these new, like,
On which type of testing? Sorry, your voice is a little faint.
predictive type cancer testing. So for cancers, there's a few of these coming out, like Grail and so forth. Um, there's like the Grail panel, like there's about 45 different cancers that you couldn't screen for before, and these guys have, the sensitivity and specificity on them is actually, it's pretty good. What do you
Wow.
what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I don't do any cancer screening tests. Again, not
Yeah.
being a doctor, most of the people I work with are relatively fit and healthy who are just trying to kind of get to the next level. So that's really not something I do much at all of. I certainly will recommend that folks, work with, yeah, some of the better physicians, I think, in the industry for this, as far as their outside the box approach, like Dr. Nasha Winters or Thomas Seyfried or Tom Cowan, some of the work they're doing with off-label pharmaceuticals at places like Care Oncology. But I typically just refer people out if, someone comes to me and they have an issue with cancer. So I don't run any of those tests myself.
No, no, yeah, I wasn't asking from a standpoint of you, I guess, working with certain people. I'm just saying, your standpoint. I mean, I know you're a avid biohacker, and you're out there in terms of, the knowing what's the latest and greatest in the
Yeah.
industry.
And that's really not something I have much experience with, to be honest with you.
Oh, cool, cool. Yeah, we've been working with that, and it's been interesting, to say the least. And again, just trying to live in the big data space, and collecting the most amount of information that we can, right? Um,
Well, what with that Braille test, what exactly are they looking at?
so for each of the markers, right? So there's tests there that we've never been able to screen for. So, for example, like a PSA, right? Well, PSA is not a very good tumor marker, right? So they've been able to come up with some tumor markers for certain cancers that we have never had screening before. Some of them, they have lower sensitivity and specificity, but what they're looking for is for precursor cells, and not so much for cancer process, like, angiogenesis, etc., where the cancer would most cancers start by forming, more blood vessels, etc., but they're actually looking for specific cells. So let's say ovarian cells, or testicular cells, or pancreatic cells, what have you, that already have gone into different phases of the cancer phase, right? G0, G1, etc., in the mitotic processes of the cell. So they're actually looking at the cell, from what I understand. So it's
Oh,
it's
wow.
something us too. It's something new to us too, and the predictive value that they have is pretty high. So,
Yeah,
and when somebody comes positive, they urge the practitioners to say, hey, like, let's get on with it and take this client, this patient serious, and to help them get rid of this, this situation. So
yeah.
I'm liking it so far. So, um, all right, so maybe let's get into some get out of the testing space, and maybe let's talk a little bit about some therapies. So some of your, and like I said, like I'm asking from a general perspective. To tell you the truth, I didn't even know you worked with people specifically. So I'm asking from a general perspective of like the industry, right? My questions are coming from industry, as it's such a fast growing industry, right? Even I have a hard time to keep up. Actually, I just came back from the peptide conference, Dr. Seed's
Oh
peptide,
yeah,
do this webinar, and I'm going back. So, always trying to keep up. So,
yeah.
what are your thoughts on bioidentical hormones? Is it necessary? Is it not necessary? Um, what are your thoughts on that? At what age would you start them, or what symptomology? Or again, not you, but just in general, what do you think on bioidentical hormone therapy?
Yeah, you know, the, the thing that I see a lot of times is it's used as kind of like a fast track band-aid to poor lifestyle and training and dietary practices. I mean, if you look at something like testosterone, right, you got a lot of low-hanging fruit before you even really need to get into, an androgel or an injection or a pellet or something like that. And yeah, and you'll get a lot of people, especially men over the age of 35 or beginning to experience andropause, but haven't optimized for the variables, namely creatine, vitamin D, boron, zinc, magnesium, and DHEA. Those would probably be the biggest that I see over and over again as suboptimal, and yet people just like skip over all that, don't optimize those variables, which are obviously a lot easier to tackle, and instead go straight to hormone replacement. Same thing could be said for training. We know there's a large density of androgen receptors in the lower body musculature, and yet you'll see a lot of guys, going to the gym, bench pressing, or women spending a lot of time with low level physical activity on a treadmill, the elliptical. And I'm obviously painting with a broad brush here, but this is just what I tend to see. And and not a lot of people are considering things like everything from not only deadlifts and squats to more biohacking modalities like single set to failure training using something like an ARX machine, or electrical muscle stimulation using something like a catalyst or a newbie to really trigger those androgen receptors. And they're doing a lot more either lighter weight or upper body or chronic cardio. From a dietary standpoint, I don't know a lot of people who are consuming large amounts of organ meats with high levels of fat soluble vitamins, and relatively lower levels of methionine compared to muscle meat, like liver and heart, kidney and marrow and bone broth rich in glycine, and a lot of these things, even a lot of there's obviously, as having been at Dr. Seed's conference, there's this new field of bioregulatory peptides which can target certain organs with a great deal of specificity. But I mean, even going old school and eating organ glandulars, the testicles, I have a whole pantry full of testicle, capsules, and spleen and pancreas and lung and brain and gallbladder, just based off this idea. And then they actually have done some interesting amino acid tracer studies finding that those compounds can wind up in the target organ. And so, I think that the other thing from a nutritional standpoint is, of course, we still battle a little bit of fat phobia as well, and the folks who are doing more of like a Westonate price type of approach with large amounts of, ghee and butter and ferments and cod liver oil and more of the saturated portions of muscle meat from the animal, et cetera. They tend to have a lot better hormone profiles. So what I'm getting at here is there are so many things that can be optimized from an exercise and nutrition standpoint. And then, of course, the lifestyle component, you certainly see some people, let's say a man with still pretty active, LH, and the Leydig cells in the testes are doing what they're supposed to do, but due to poor lifestyle practices, poor sleep, high cortisol, fast-paced lifestyle, not enough meditation, not enough slowing down, not enough of a mindfulness practice, nature doesn't want to bring a baby into a stressed out or famished world, and so you see an upregulation of sex hormone binding globulin, and usually that's a reaction to high levels of cortisol, which can of course take the the fact that total testosterone is being regulated just fine by the testes, but free testosterone is low because it's bound, and so that's another issue. So ultimately, I think that if you had taken care of all those things, let's say you're older, a lot of times you'll see this in a male who's 35, 40 plus, and you do want to use hormone replacement. Typically, I think another error that's often made is a large bolus of delivery, like an injection once or twice a week. That doesn't really match, in my opinion, the natural diurnal variation in testosterone that occurs on a daily basis, right? I think it's better to pulse with smaller amounts, for example, like a scrotal cream applied in the morning and then in the evening on a daily basis versus an injection. Pellets can do a decent job kind of controlling that delivery as well in a little bit more of a natural fashion. For women, probably the number one issue that I tend to see is estrogen dominance paired with low progesterone and low DHEA. And I have a lot of women who feel really, really good once they start to use something as simple as like a DHEA combined with, for example, like a transdermal progesterone, along with attention paid to eliminating phytoestrogens and estrogenic compounds from their environment, like their personal care products and household cleaning chemicals and plastic containers and things along those lines. And a lot of women who tend to have everything from period issues to low libido, low sex drive, low energy, they tend to do really well once they begin to lower estrogen and increase progesterone and DHEA. But again, same thing for women. There's a lot of lifestyle factors at play as well, when it comes to the sleep, to the stress, to the high intake of fat soluble vitamins, et cetera. So I think that there's a lot of low hanging fruit to tackle before you go hardcore into hormone replacement therapy.
Right. And one point here actually that I ended up skipping, I just looked back because when you started talking about zinc and so forth, the question before I had before was actually your thoughts on um, micronutrient therapy. So because we don't do anything, like I said, we collect data, right? You just mentioned women with a lot of their personal hygiene products and soaps and et cetera, et cetera. So we do chemical testing and so forth because lots of times it's right there. It's in the chemical test and you see it. This person's having issues with tetrachloroethylene or whatever, be it heavy metals, whatever it is. And and then it's producing a lot of those xenoestrogens and so forth. So yeah, that's something definitely aligned with you right there, brother. And but on the micronutrient side too, because and again, I have an MD, but I'm a doctorpreneur, if you will. I'm I have the other clinicians that we are practicing and so forth. But as I build the model of what we're doing. I always say, this is not a hormone replacement place. This is not peptide. This is a place to balance the body, right? To remove toxicity, number one, replace what's missing, so your body produces its own hormone. So your body becomes optimal again. That's why I like to say, go back to the grand design, kind of how you were designed by your maker, to operate, and that's why there's nature, and that's where we should be getting our things, right? Unfortunately, yeah, I mean, especially if you're living, I'm in downtown Miami, in the middle of the cement jungle, right? I mean, it's a little harder to do certain things. I can see you're probably not in the middle of downtown somewhere right there, right now, but um, and lots of times, Ben, I'm going to tell you, I wonder. I'm like, will I move my family into the middle of nowhere one day and just grow my own stuff and because I'm right there with you. I think the answer is not taking a bunch of uh, of things that we don't want to, and then you even get into medications. But the answer is to go as natural as possible.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, lots of times the body's not. I mean, you can't get it through your foods, et cetera, but biochemical therapy to me is massively important. I'm reading now for the second time a book called Nutrient Power. It's by William Walsh. It talks about pretty much psychiatry and
Uh-huh.
biochemical therapy for psychiatry, which instead of, and it also, talks about how that's probably going to be the future of medicine. And I totally agree. I totally agree. There's a law, there's Pfeiffer's law, that for every chemical that's able to produce a impact on the psyche, there's also a natural occurring element that can do the same. So, and I really believe in that, and that's where one of the biggest things you mentioned SpectraCell a few moments ago. We use them. We've used them for a long time. I really like their testing. To me, micronutrient therapy is the first thing, because if you can suffice your biochemical pathways, right? With I never got into the organ meats and the into that stuff. I've never I'm a pretty I love my steak, but I haven't gotten that hardcore yet. But with the
Ah, you're missing
um,
out.
yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, if you're biohacking, you got to try. Maybe I might do a 30 days, uh, 30 days organ meat.
You'll feel like a superhero if you do. Stuff's amazing. Just the bioavailability is wonderful as well. Plus, it's an anti-aging hack because you're getting a lot more of the glycine and other compounds that help to kind of counteract the high levels, like I was mentioning, the amino acid methionine that's primarily in the muscle meat. That's why our ancestors would have fed the muscle meat to the dogs. They knew it was good for them, and they'd go for the marrow and the liver and the kidney and the heart and even the brain. And so, there's a lot of benefit to be had from that. And you're right. Like I live out on 10 acres in the forest. I got goats, I got chickens. We grow most of our own food. I'm out in the sunshine a lot of the day. I'm working with my hands. I'm laboring. I think that lifestyle compared to like a modern industrial indoor lifestyle where you're trying to battle against your box you're living in with injections and synthetics. Yeah, you can get along to a certain extent with that, but man, you just feel so much more better and connected to the sacredness of nature and connected to your body, et cetera, when you kind of flip the switch and go with a little bit more of a natural approach, in my opinion.
No, absolutely, man. I mean, unfortunately, it's like I said, a lot of our clients, it's not their luxury, right? They're living in high rises and so forth, and breathing in all this smog, et cetera. I mean, I mean, what we try to do when we see a lot of these people are deficient, it's like, hey, man, we're gonna custom make some injections for you at pharmacies, and here you need some micronutrients. Lots of times when you give these guys micronutrients, et cetera, and you use some, like, I'm a huge fan of boron, and we use the Tenkat Ali and the Fadoja
Yeah,
Quest, all that good stuff. I mean, you just see those hormone levels go right, especially on young guys. Like, hey, man, lots of times it's like, and then cortisol is wreaking havoc on this guy. They're stressed, and and that's where mindfulness always comes in as well, man. Because are you seeing, it's your brain doesn't run on reality, it runs on your damn perception, brother. So it's like, is it you stress or distress, right? And then as that cortisol is ramping up, and we see where when you mitigate these levels of stress, or how you're seeing stress, let's say, um I don't really know about levels of stress. Everybody has stress. It's how you see it, right? The person's hormone profile starts to improve. So yeah, we're
yeah,
definitely aligned on that. Like, it's always what I say. First, let's clean out all the toxicity in your life, right? And hey, if the person can move out of the big city and move into to go to a place that's more isolated, etc. I grew up. I don't know if you're familiar with them. I grew up Seventh Day Adventist.
yeah,
Uh, blue zones in the U.S. Yeah, I grew up that way. So I grew up not eating, no scavengers, none of that stuff. Like, that was just like ingrained in me as a kid. But there's a few cancer treatment centers down in South America, and it's in the middle of nowhere. It's in the middle of the jungle, and all
yeah.
they're gonna give you is just pure freaking veggies, and it's like they just blend the stuff, and you're not having a lot of calories a day. You're having very little calories, and what you're having is just, it's coming straight from nature in the middle of nowhere. No cell phone, no nothing. You're just gonna, I actually
Yeah,
had.
there's a place like that called the Swiss Mountain Clinic. You fly into Milan, it's a 90-minute drive from there, and there's like the Paracelsus Clinic in Germany, which is like $40,000 a week. This one in the Swiss Mountain Clinic, it's like $5,000 a week, same treatments, and they got it's out in the middle of nowhere. No Wi-Fi, low EMF. They've even tested it for the geopathic stressors, and it's one of those kind of like areas that has naturally high levels of the Schumann resonance frequency and some of those healing frequencies emanated by the planet Earth. Super good, clean, pure, pristine water from a spring. The menu is set up for your exact condition. A lot of people go there for Lyme, cancer, etc. But it's a little bit different than, say, like fancy treatments, let's say the Mayo Clinic, because the environment is optimized. I think that some people may think you got to move to like a pristine Himalayan mountaintop or something like that. But I mean, fact is, even in a high rise, like you can get a good HEPA air filter with a negative ion generator and begin to use essential oils similar to what you'd be getting outside, and use infrared light panels to simulate sunlight, and use grounding and earthing pads in your bed for a night of sleep. And so there's ways that you can kind of simulate nature even in those environments, although obviously nothing's going to come close to the real thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I know, but I just want to do a little webcam fist bump with you because I'm definitely aligned with you on the nature side, and like I told you, if anything, like I told you, I grew up at Ventus. We're big in nature. Like that's something they suggest, even spend time with your kids in nature, etc. So, but let me kind of open it here, because I've been kind of pulling you to answer some questions here on some of our methodologies and some thoughts, and I really appreciate all your input. But so what are some of your favorite hacks, man? Like just your little formula to superhuman, and I promised a few people, I'm like, okay, I'm going to talk to him for 30 to 40 minutes, try to figure out a little success formula, a little cheat sheet, and if I may,
Yeah,
what I usually say, look, number one, remove toxicity. I call it the 5 R's, right? Remove toxicity, number one. Where's the inflammation coming from your life, et cetera? Is it, is it the soaps? Is it the foods you're eating? Whatever. Remove is number one. Number two, replenish. What's missing? Like micronutrients, et cetera. Right foods, et cetera. Replenish whatever is missing. Number three, reinoculate that gut flora. Gut flora is super important, right? Four, recovery. How's your recovery process doing? It's very important. And then ultimately, last R I call re-exist, because that's when you start to live a better life. That, and
yeah,
ultimately, this is what there's 12,000 documented diseases right now, about 129 documented autoimmune diseases. Okay, but the process for all of them is four things. And you'll let me know if you agree with this. Number one, submethylation. Number two, oxidation. Number three, glycation issues. And number four, inflammation. You control these four pillars, all of a sudden, things start to improve in your life. That's my little 2 cents on a success formula. Now, if you could do that by moving into a 10-acre piece of land in the middle of somewhere really nice and lower EMF levels and grow your own food, etc., by all means. But also, if you're stuck in the middle of this, city, and you're a fast-paced person, and we got to be honest, man, a lot of people are not going to do that. They're not going to go move into the middle of, somewhere isolated, etc. So, figure out how you're going to do it. But that's my little 2 cent on my success formula. What's your thoughts on that, and what's your little formula?
yeah, I like that formula. I would say, you kind of like have a nice little four-legged stool there in terms of the glycation and the methylation and the inflammation and what was your last one? It was
I
what's
call it
that?
SOGI. I call it SOGI, just to make it
Yeah,
easy. Submethylation, oxidation, glycation, inflammation. SOGI.
yeah, yeah. So the submethylation component, I think, yeah, I totally agree with all that. I would say one thing to bear in mind is that when you see submethylation and poor toxin and poor metal clearance, typically the other thing that you tend to have to address, in my opinion, is a high load of metals, and this flies under the radar a lot, the emerging electrohypersensitivity that occurs when you have that combination of already being in cell danger response mode from the inflammation and the metal load. You'll wind up having a lot of people who load from the submethylation, and so who feel really good if they can EMF in their personal environment, in terms of like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, things along those lines. So, just a random aside regarding the submethylations, it results in some downstream issues that I think also often need to be addressed. Now, the whole electrohypersensitivity thing, I guess that's, the more directly reply to your question about, hacks that I think should be top of the totem pole to optimize one's health span and lifespan. I think it was Nikola Tesla who said that if you want to understand the universe, you got to think in terms of energy and frequency and
Yeah.
vibration. When you look at books like Robert Becker's The Body Electric or Jerry Tennant's Healing is Voltage,
Hmm.
you come across this concept of the human body as almost like a battery with the necessity for a relatively negative electrochemical potential on the interior of the cell and more positive on the exterior of the cell. And anything that you can do to optimize that battery and the flow of electrons, not only through the electron transport chain, but throughout the rest of the body, is really going to serve you well. And, obviously you've got, Men's Health and Women's Health magazine and the popular, fitness and health world, lauding the benefits of physical activity and eating healthy, but ignoring the fact that there's a lot of other things that must be done in order to optimize physiology, especially when you look at things from a battery or an electrical standpoint. And so, there are certain things that I think should be top of the totem pole based on that. For example, how do you actually excite minerals and electrons in the human body? How do you actually, do things like structure the blood in the same way that water would be structured as it travels up through the vasculature of a plant, even without the beating of a heart, against gravity? Well, a lot of that is based on photonic light charging and exposure to high amounts, particularly of infrared light. And so one really, really big component, I think, of a fully healthy lifestyle is not only adequate sun exposure in a wise and discerning way, so that you're not burning yourself with excess UVA and UVB radiation, for example, between about 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. are some of the more difficult times to be out there. But, right when you wake up, large amount of sun exposure to establish a normal and healthy circadian rhythm, and then throughout the day, repeated bouts of exposure to photons of light to excite the electrons in your body, combined with the use of things like infrared saunas, infrared light panels, infrared headset devices for the brain, which have been shown to delay onset of things like dementia, Alzheimer's, and basically becoming a little bit of like a light hound, a light seeker, a light eater, and really understanding that if you're indoors, even under like bright LED fluorescent light, that in no way mimics the natural light that you're getting from the sun and from infrared light sources. So, gosh, there's a panel right beside me here that I stand in front of while I'm working that shines infrared light on my body. There's an infrared sauna in the room next door, sunlight outside. And then, there's even this concept of doing things that help your body to absorb those photons of light even better, such as the use of things like methylene blue or dark greens like chlorella and spirulina, which help those photons to interact with the cells in a format that allows for even greater ATP production. And so, you're eating blues, you're eating greens, you're getting photons of light, you're getting a good spectrum of infrared, you're getting out in the sunlight, especially earlier in the day, and then in your home, ideally, you're replacing fluorescent LED light with more natural forms of lighting that more closely mimic sunlight, such as, I think the best is in all rooms of the house, except for the sleeping areas, incandescent light bulbs, and then in the sleeping areas, red incandescent light bulbs. And that will do a really good job giving you more of an outdoorsy feel, no matter where you're at in the house at what time of day. So light would be a biggie. A second would be interaction with the Earth's frequencies, which I briefly mentioned earlier, because these also help to charge the body. When lightning strikes the planet, it just basically causes this surge of negative ions to be injected into the surface of the Earth that we live on. And so if you go outside and you walk outside barefoot along the beach, especially in like salt water, it's amazing for grounding and earthing, laying on your back in your backyard. Even buying things like grounding and earthing mats that you can stand on, that you place like underneath your desk or underneath the top sheet of your bed, climbing rocks, touching trees, basically harnessing both the negative ions from the planet as well as these frequencies that range anywhere from 3 to 100 hertz that have really good anti-inflammatory and healing power, and again, help to charge up the body's battery. It's one of the best things you can do after you've been traveling 40,000 feet above the planet in a giant metal tube, disconnected from the Earth's healing frequencies, is to get outside barefoot. It's one of the best fixes for jet lag that I know of, or to go lay on your back in a park, because you're just basically resetting your body's battery. So light and grounding would be two. The charges, the electrolytes have to be carried through your body somehow. And, the nature of the water that you drink can help to form a little bit of what is called an exclusion zone, where you've got a higher positive charge, or I'm sorry, high negative charge on the liquid, and a higher positive charge on the vasculature that the liquid travels through. And so a lot of people will use a website like findaspring.com to find water that's actually structured in that way. And if you don't, you can get a whole house water filtration system or pour through water filters or countertop water filters that are not just like reverse osmosis or carbon block, which are great, but then after the water passes through the carbon block filtration or through the reverse osmosis filtration, it passes through a structured water filter. And structured water, basically, it introduces like a vortices and a series of minerals that the water passes through to allow it to be much more close to like an underground spring that our ancestors might have tapped into for water without it sitting in pipes and in the municipal water supply, collecting fluoride and chlorine and birth control pills and whatever else happens to be in there. So drinking clear, filtered, pure, structured water, and then mineralizing that water with really, really good sources of minerals. Obviously, there's tons of companies out there that sell trace liquid minerals. There's tons of different very high quality salt companies out there, but salting water, adding electrolytes to water, salting food, and basically consuming a lot of these charged particles that allow your body's battery to stay charged is also very important. So I'd pay a lot of attention to your water intake, especially your structured water intake, as well as your mineral intake, in addition to the light and the earthing. And then I think probably another two that are biggies in my own life that I think also help with not just blood flow, but electron flow. And again, this idea of the body as a battery. One would be regular bouts of hyperthermia, just because of the heat shock proteins, the cellular resilience, the decrease in blood pressure, the increase in cardiovascular efficiency, the increase in blood glucose control, and the host of other positive benefits derived from a regular, robust weekly sauna practice. Or if you don't have access to a sauna, just basically getting a really good sweat on. It might be exercising in the heat of the afternoon or wearing an extra layer of clothing to the gym. There's a lot of ways to hack this. I think the best way to do it is via like a full spectrum infrared sauna, because you're getting both the heat and the light photons I was talking about earlier. But 3 to 5 times a week, from 20 to 45 minutes of hyperthermia, I think is fantastic. And then, of course, no surprises here, you'd ideally want to pair that with some form of cold thermogenesis, which again allows for increased cellular resilience. It's one of the best ways to control that glycemic variability that I was talking about earlier. Even as short as a 1-minute bout of cold can do a fantastic job stabilizing blood glucose for hours afterwards. But basically, something like a cold shower at the beginning and the end of the day. More difficult in Miami. I know the water doesn't get too cold there, but you, of course, have facilities that have things like cryotherapy chambers. There are companies now that make like cold tubs and cold tanks and cold soaks that you can basically just install in your house. Some people go old school and pick up a couple bags of ice a few days a week on their way home from the gas station and dump it into their bathtub. But basically, one rule I live by is at least once a day, I try to breathe hard. At least once a day, I try to break a really good sweat. At least once a day, I try to get into like a teeth chattering, shivering type of cold environment. And again, it doesn't have to be long, even just 2 to 5 minutes of cold a couple of times a day, or even just once a day can be really beneficial. So let's say you're moving and you're eating healthy. Well, I'd at least start with like light, earthy and grounding, water, quality water, minerals, heat, and cold. And that's a pretty good start.
There you go, man. There you go. You said a lot of stuff I wanted to comment on, but you're on a roll. I didn't want to interrupt you, but yeah, the structured water, huge on that too, and then just the concept of you being a battery, that and I like Dr. Tennant a lot and the stuff that he teaches, etc. Like I totally believe in it, and actually because of that, I bought a biocharger maybe like a year or so ago. I don't know if you're familiar with biochargers. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I use mine every day. Typically a couple times a day. Yeah, because that's a combination of infrared light, negative ions, pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, which is like that grounding and earthing that I was talking about, but on steroids, and then radio frequencies, which are like these old school Rife therapies. Speaking of Tesla, very similar to some of the research that he did that can be used to target everything from parasites to yeast to fungus, inflammation to lymph flow. So yeah, that's a great tool for stacking a lot of these modalities.
Yeah, so that's what I needed to do. I'm like, okay, how can I? And I found the device, and I don't know if you ever touched the lightning bolt on that thing generates up top.
Yeah, my kids like to do that.
Yeah, well, I didn't have a good experience, but But anyhow, no. So listen, brother. I really appreciate a lot of the insights that you've dropped in today. I definitely feel a lot of alignment. Actually, complete alignment with in everything you said. And I know you were getting familiar a little bit with what we do, but it just comes down to data. Collect as much data as we can to really understand how the body works, um, and get the biochemical processes of the body moving, et cetera. And like I summarized to you, I got that little success formula. Yeah, and then how you're going to do it, right? It depends on what your resources are. But like you were saying, you just gave so many little good hacks, and I like that one. Even just getting a bag of ice on your way from work and just filling your tub with it. We're building here an insane biohacking facility here in downtown Miami.
Oh
So if you're
wow.
ever in town, yeah, like I'm talking about, like,
Yeah, well, I'll be in town bringing my sons down for a free diving and spearfishing trip down to South Florida in January, or no, I'm sorry, April. And then I'll be down there actually at a place in Sarasota, Dr. John Lawrence's facility down there, teaching a clinic in December. So a couple of times I'll be down in your kind of neck of the woods.
oh, I'd love for you to go. No, I'm telling you, like I basically all the biohacking equipment. I mean, almost like the cryos and the hyperbaric chambers and the infrared beds. Like we'll have it here at our facility. It's almost done. It'll be done in 2 months. So, I
Cool.
insist stop by, man. You're gonna like it. For city people, I think you'll be pretty impressed at what what we'll have put together. I mean, everything's gonna be Bouncer Pro. I mean, we really we're putting everything in one room, and just seeing how many superhumans we can create.
I love it.
All right, man. So listen, wanted to thank you for your time. This was the first time I also got to spend some time with you. Really cool dude. Definitely vibed with you, man, and look forward to running into you again. And we got to get this word out more, brother, because unfortunately the world's not, mainstream media, et cetera, is not taking the world into a good place of health, man.
Yeah.
So yeah, we got a lot
Yeah.
of work to do, and roll up our sleeves and keep preaching the good message, man. And thank you for your time today, man. Really
All
grateful for your
right.
time.
Love what you're doing, Dr. D. Keep up the great work, man.
All right, man. God bless,
All
man.
right.
Talk.
Later. God bless you too.
All right, bye.